Welcome. This is AD&D's Curse of the Azure Bonds. This is a run I did offline about a week ago. And this video is intended to be kind of a route description commentary, just explaining how the speedrun works and all the necessary details and you need to know about it if you're couching it or wanting to know about it before the run happens at RPG Limit Break. So we start with a party of a human paladin, 3 human fighters, a human cleric, and a half-elf fighter magic user. Except for the cleric, all are male because first edition rules were racist and sexist. Put a lot of restrictions on non-male human characters. There are other things that they can do better, like the half-elf can be a fighter and magic user at the same time, which has its own bonuses in the game. The cleric is female because clerics can only have a maximum of 18 strength, so human females can reach that amount as well as human males, so it's... and I need a female for a certain point in the game as part of the route. We start off with no equipment. According to the storyline, your characters on their way to their next adventure after winning the Pool of Radiance were ambushed and knocked unconscious, and after spending several weeks comatose, wake up at an inn in Tilverton, and they've been stripped of their equipment. Luckily, whoever left them there at the inn also left them with a nice amount of cash to buy some basic equipment, which is the first thing we have to do. You can buy the best armor, normal armor in the game. You can get plate mail for all the characters, because the fighter magic user in first edition has all the bonuses of both fighter and magic user. It's one of the nice things about it. He can only reach a maximum of 8th level and as both fighter and magic user, but that is not a big problem in this game because I won't get higher than that anyway with the experience I'm going to be gathering. So he is limited in his strength to a maximum of 1890, while humans get an 18100, but it's still a... the trade-off of being able to cast magic and wear plate mail is pretty good. I only give bows to green and silver for now, and pretty soon no one will have bows, unlike some of the other games where bows are very valuable. You just get a better sword in this game. So we've started out with all maximum stats because this game does allow you to modify them, and we have simply... maxing out the stats is the fastest way to play the game, because first edition especially, once again, you don't even get bonuses to most... properties from your stats until you reach level, or until you get a 15 or higher in that stat, so it just makes more sense since you're allowed to adjust stats to maximize them. The first thing we have to do in the city is buy equipment, then we have to talk to the Sage Filani, and this allows us to activate the first flag, which is trying to leave the city. The guards stop us because the king's coming and they don't want anyone near him, and then when the king shows up, these Azure Bonds we suddenly woke with, the ubiquitous curse of the, or the namesake curse of the game, causes us to attack the king. We find it's not really the king, it's a bard named Georgie Wyverns who's very good at mimicking people, and then suddenly the bonds allow us to stop attacking the king, but then the guards come up to defend him because they don't know what's going on and we have to fight. We're allowed to surrender, saying if you say no you get into another fight and then you can run around the city where you have to get picked up by thieves, or you can say yes, you get surrendered, thrown in jail if the thieves come and rescue you anyway. Thieves want your help against the Fire Knives, a group of assassins. They're muscling in on their territory, but while they're trying to talk to you for help, Fire Knives bust in, kill the guildmaster, and so we're stuck in this big battle between the renegade thieves, who unfortunately look just like our ally thieves, and the 2 Fire Knife leaders that they've got in this party. So now the next stage of the game is going to be us escaping through the sewers into the Fire Knives Hideout so we can deal with their leader and free ourselves from the first of these 5 masters we have. The first few battles are relatively slow. They're not very difficult, but we don't have a lot of options right now, especially since I have a fighter magic user. A pure human magic user, which is I have used in previous routes, start at 5th level. They can use a 3rd level spell, namely Fireball, which is one of the best spells in the entire game for blowing up lots of enemies, and using a Fireball here is kind of useful. But they're very limited in so many other ways, not being able to use any equipment or armor. So unfortunately, the fighter magic user tends to be faster overall, even though I only start as a 4th level magic user. But it's eventually I'll get the spells that I need, and it ends up being faster overall throughout the game because he can wear armor and wield weapons. And especially bows early on, which are great. Now, early on in the game, I'm going to be relying a lot on things like Stinking Cloud and Hold Person to try and make enemies helpless. Any kind of effect from sleep, paralyzation, choking and gagging from a stinking cloud. This causes you to become helpless, and a helpless character, unlike in normal JRPGs like, say, Final Fantasy, you don't get an automatic hit on a sleeping character and wake them up. You actually get a coup de grace attack. It takes your entire turn, even if you have multiple attacks. Although, if you've used previous attacks, it ends your attack, but you can still use a coup de grace later if you kill an enemy with the first attack and then come against another one. But it's a final attack that automatically sends an enemy into down and dying status. Then once we've used a few spells and such, it's easier just to go to quick combat because the game moves so quickly. We're just cleaning up trash here, and this is pretty RNG heavy battle just because we don't have a lot of good options. RNG is very present in this kind of RPG anyway, with D&D rules modifying everything. But this one in particular, since we don't have a lot of broken ways to easily win the fight, we're at the mercy of saving throws and attack rolls and such. Now, as we're trying to make our way through, we save a lot because we want to avoid random encounters as much as we can, like that. So here I have to quit and reload because they take a bit too much time. So we'll get occasional brief glances at my desktop as I have to save and reload. Later on, in certain areas, it won't be worth it to quit and reload if I get into a random encounter. So I'll be fighting them, but other places in the game, it's very, very slow to fight encounters, especially since there's no easy way to run away. Our first place we need to go to is an armory, which will give us... This is a set battle, so you have to come in here. We fight some dogs. This would be another place where a fireball would be really great, but unfortunately I don't have it, so just... Especially at the distance that they're at and the size of these dogs, larger creatures are not as effective against... Stinking Cloud, rather, with its small area, is not as effective against larger creatures like this, because you can only catch 2 or a maximum of 3, depending on their position in there. So it's easier still just to chop our way through the low hit armor class, or rather high armor class, low hit point dogs. Once again, because this is first edition, it has a lot of the weird old original AD&D rules. Later editions from 3rd onward, especially 3.5, 4th, 5th, tend to have a lot more reasonable, easy to understand rules. For whatever reason, the wonderful scientists of Gary Gygax and such who designed first edition rules had them be very complicated. Your armor class starts at 10, and as it gets lower, you get harder to hit. So being in the negatives is very good. There's even a mini stat that characters have called Thaco, which doesn't exist in first edition. It's actually a second edition mechanic, but they put it in the game because it's a lot simpler than the attack roll tables that they used in first edition. So second edition had been out a couple of years already by the time this game came out, but they decided to use first edition rules because for the most part they were simpler, with a couple of weird exceptions like Thaco or Thaco, however you want to pronounce it. And it stands for 2-hit armor class 0, and it's basically the number you need to roll on a 20-sided die to hit that hit a creature that has 0 armor class. So each number above 0 is increases your chance to hit. So if you have a Thaco of 15 and you're attacking someone with an armor class of 5, you have to roll a 10 or higher. Negatives do the opposite, of course. And I saved right before that encounter, which was really fortuitous. But we're just about to make our way through the Fire Knife Land and into the sewers. There are actually 2 entrances to the sewers from the Fire Knives place. I'm going by the route that will take me into the hidden area of the sewers, which will allow me to bypass a lot of different encounters and other such things. It's a secret door. There are some secret doors in this game that you can pass through without knowing that they're there. Others you have to search or look and find them first. So luckily there are no random encounters, at least through the sewers area that I go through. So the first thing we're going to do is come through this alternate route, and we're going to run into some Otyugs, which are really nasty D&D creatures that feed on filth, garbage, and offal. But they're actually capable of intelligence and conversation, and these ones want to strike a bargain with us to defeat another group of Otyugs so they can claim their lair of garbage. They think it's a lot better, and they'll give us some treasure that's in theirs as well as the treasure that they have if we do it for them. We say yes because we want to avoid a fight, and then we promptly don't bother going because it's a speedrun and we don't have time to solve the problems of sewer garbage eaters. We continue our way through the sewers. We do need to get a little bit more experience so we can make sure to get our half-elf to 5th level as a magic user before the next area, because that's a very, very important spell that I need. The worst fight in the game is there, and if I don't have the haste spell, it's a lot more difficult. So we come in here to fight some trolls. They have a couple of minor magic items, but they're not. I'm not particularly super interested in those. I'm just mostly fighting this for the little bit of experience that I can get. Did I actually only get one bow? I guess I did. But can't quite reach. There we go. Stinking Cloud is a very useful spell. It's very short range and has a kind of weird AoE, but it's useful at many points because even if a character saves against the stinking effect of the cloud that causes you to choke and gag, you're still coughing, which does reduce your stats, your armor class, and your Thago, and it raises your armor class, rather, once again, uses the mechanics of this game, and gives you a chance to get hit. Interestingly, there's a weird thing about the AI. The AI in Pool of Radiance, both allies and your characters on quick combat and enemies, are smart enough not to walk into a stinking cloud, but in Curse of the Azure Bonds and later games, they charge right through them, which makes them a little bit more useful as a barrier against enemies when you're controlling your characters, but you have a very good chance. This happened to me there. 2 characters rushed into my clouds and were choking and gagging themselves. Luckily, they did not get attacked, or they also would have been one hit. No spells in this game are friendly fire, so you have to be very careful with how you place them. Got a girdle with a few hit points I give to one of my fighters, usually. Now we can come in here. We don't have enough experience to train yet from the little bit of stuff we've done, but this is a secret training hall you can use if you want to level up before the thieves. We don't in the speedrun, of course. And this is the secret door I have to look for before I can go through it, which sometimes throws me off. Because, again, the secret door that went into the sewers in the first place, we don't have to know about. This one we don't have to know about. We just walk through it. So this area, there are no encounters. But once I go past here, I have a chance of getting encounters. Only a small, short section, but I still have a good chance of getting encounters. And, again, these are very slow. So I have to reload here, because a very important part of the game is coming up. I'm about to get the last few magic items that I need to break the game. There will be other items I get that will be useful, but I picked up dust in back in the Thieves Guild Armory, and now in the Fire Knives Armory, I'm going to pick up a Necklace of Missiles. And these 2 items are both limited use items, the Dust of Disappearance being a one-shot item, which are among the most powerful in the entire game of Dungeons & Dragons, AD&D First Edition, and most especially in this game. You also get Dust of Disappearance in Pool of Radiance, and it is so overpowered that they don't give it to you again in any of the other Gold Box games. It gives an absurd amount of invisibility power. It is, in fact, in Pool of Radiance, it's the end game item, basically. It's like if you're playing a randomizer, that's your go mode item. Once I get Dust of Disappearance, I can go in the game. So the entire speedrun is getting me to the point where I'm high enough level to go and easily retrieve the dust and then be able to win the fight with it. If I was too low level, I also get some experience, because if I was too low level, I couldn't win. But it's in a pretty deep section of the game overall. But here in Curse of the Azure Bonds, they give it to you right off the bat. And the thing about all the Gold Box games that's announced as a checkpoint is that there is not really a glitch, but an exploit you can do. And this is the reason why it's an exploit, is because it's in all the Gold Box games. It's just how they're designed, and they never bothered to try and fix it. Some of these other magic items are okay. The first longsword is also the second best longsword in the entire game, and they give it to you again right at the beginning. The best longsword in the game you don't get until the very end of the game, so this longsword I'll also multiply and give to all of my fighters and my paladin, everyone but the cleric, who can't use it because she's a cleric, can't use bladed weapons in first and second ed. And with those, as well as +2 flail, I couldn't remember which of these was better, so I played around and looked at them. You don't need to identify magic items to know what they are in order to be able to use them. Sometimes it's better if you don't know what exactly it is to ID it first, because it could be a cursed berserking weapon or something, but these are set items and I know in general what they are. I can save a little bit of time by just remembering that rather than playing around. But so in order to activate this, I have to be in a training hall, or I have to be in the game's loading screen. In this game. In Pool of Radiance, you have to be in a training hall, because when you load a game, you load immediately where you are. But in Curse of the Azure Bonds and all the later Gold Box games, they will actually as we load up the game, we will be in the party formation screen, basically. We can't train, but we can do all the other functions you can do in a training hall, including adding and removing characters. The game keeps the database for your characters who are not in a party separate from any of the save games, and allows you to transfer them between them. This makes Curse of the Azure Bonds pretty much the first real game RPG that was ever made that allows a new game plus. After you've beaten the game, you can remove all of your characters, start a new game, add all those characters into the new party that you're starting, and they will begin with all their equipment and levels. You can't do it in Pool of Radiance because after you win the game, those characters are flagged as having won the game, and they aren't allowed to be added to your party anymore. They just exist to be transferred to Curse of the Azure Bonds. But for whatever reason, they do allow you to continue characters with Curse of the Azure Bonds. But regardless, the way that I use this exploit is that I remove one of the characters from my party so that I can add a 7th character, a baggage character. I call him Bags usually. For the run, he's going to have a name determined by the community through their donations. And his entire purpose is to hold stuff for me so that I can take it back later. So after I save the game, and then I add him to the party, give him all of my stuff that I want to multiply, and then I drop the party members permanently. Once I've dropped my entire party, I don't have a party anymore. I can't play the game. It drops me back to what essentially is the beginning party formation screen. It eliminates my save game. And so then I can load up my save game again before I gave the items to Bags. But because Bags exists separately outside of that save file, I can add him to the party and he has all the items I gave him, thus allowing me to multiply, as you can see, all these dusts and necklaces and longswords, +3 Frostbrand, +6 against flaming creatures, brought longsword. And so using this, the Dust of Disappearance now is very important because it makes you gives you what later games call improved invisibility. Normal invisibility, once you attack, it goes away, which is pretty standard in a lot of RPGs, especially Western ones, to prevent invisibility abuse. But improved invisibility allows you to continue attacking and such, and it's a higher level spell that is more difficult to negate. And although there are spells like True Seeing in later editions of the game that enable you to see invisible creatures or to cancel invisibility effects, there's nothing like that that really exists in this game. And so invisible creatures, especially with the way the AI works, it's one of the reasons that it's so powerful. You have a natural bonus to armor class. You don't have concealment or mischance like later editions give you, but you do have an essential armor class bonus against people who attack you, and they can only attack you if they are in melee combat with you. And even if an ally is in melee combat, if an enemy is not in melee combat with a character, can't see any characters, they won't even move. They'll just stand there. They can't see anyone, so they won't move to attack. They can't target you with anything that is not a melee attack. Not spell... Well, that is not quite true. There are a couple of strange effects that can be used, possibly because they're weird melee gazes. I'll explain a couple of them when we get there, but there are only 2 in the game that are of any importance. Which I'll point out. But all the rest, Beholder Rays and spells from Storm Giant Lightning Bolts, Hold Person spells, Cleric spells, Magic User spells, even AoE spells. Technically, you can, if you are fighting invisible creatures, you could throw fireballs. If you couldn't see them at all, you could target their space, or you could throw fireballs behind where they are and they would explode and damage them still. But the enemy can't do that, and they're not smart enough to. They're not programmed to throw spells into a blank space to try and hit you. So their spells are wasted. You're literally basically immune to magic as long as you use the Dust of Disappearance. And it lasts a good long time. If you rest, it will go away. But it will last through multiple battles. I usually use about 2 to 3 dusts per dungeon. So I multiply up enough to make sure that I can have some for the entire game. I usually have a couple extra, but it doesn't take a whole lot of time to multiply, especially since you can fill his thing, and perhaps maybe eventually I'll optimize the exact amount that I need, but for the most part I just make sure I have enough. The other item I have, which we're going to see on display as well, is the necklaces of missiles, which I'll explain in a minute. I just used the dust here. I'm about to step into this checkpoint and they ask me to surrender. This allows me to skip the battle against them, and they take me right to the leader. A bunch of stuff happens that's recorded in the journal entry, and we end up fighting the main group. And all of these archers can't shoot us. The mage in the back can't cast spells on us because we're invisible. Now we're going to use the Necklaces of Missiles. Although it's called Necklace of Missiles, it doesn't cast the magic missile spell that you might expect. It instead casts Fireball. The game description in the original first edition Dungeon Master's Guide explains the Necklace of Missiles as this necklace with a bunch of beads in it. And you pluck a bead off of the necklace and you throw it and it explodes into a fireball. So using the Necklace of Missiles basically casts a fireball spell. Some of them are very weak. I got a 9 point and an 8 point here. And like most spells in D&D, you can make a saving throw against spells for the fireball, and if you make a saving throw, you take half damage rounded down. So some take 9 or 8 because they didn't make the save. The ones who do take 4. But here's a normal one, a powerful one, does 20 damage. And the Necklaces of Missiles especially are very random damage because the fireball, the original actual magic item in D&D has a certain amount of fireballs of various levels, and you don't know quite exactly which the power of the one until you pluck it off, and then the GM would keep track of those on a separate sheet if he gave you this magic item. I'm not sure quite if the game keeps track of that or just randomly rolls up what the power of a fireball is when you use it, but regardless, sometimes you get weak ones, sometimes you get powerful ones. But a fireball explodes in a 3 square radius out from its target point in a circle, not going too diagonally, and not any farther than that. So basically, if you throw it at the very center of a screen, everything but the 3 corner squares in all 4 corners will be hit by the fireball. That's basically its AoE, indoors. Its AoE is lesser outdoors, only a 2 radius from the center of the portion, but still pretty decent. So here we are using the Necklace of Missiles just to clean up the last couple of Fire Knives, and that completes the first fifth of the game. Kind of the introduction to the game. I accidentally hit myself with it, but it doesn't matter. This battle's over. You have to be careful with it, though, because, again, nothing is random. The king kicks us out of Cormyr. We have a dream where we see the rest of our masters telling us that we're going to serve them, and we're banished from the city because we tried to attack the king, and since we're still bonded, we have these Azure bonds on us. He doesn't know if someone else will try to have them kill him, so he can't allow us to be in Cormyr. So on the overmap, you just journey from city to city. You don't actually move. It just says where you want to go. These are the neighboring cities you can travel to. And then you can choose to travel by road or wilderness. In certain areas, certain options are safer than the other. But the very first time you leave Tilverton to go to Ashpenford, the only city you can reach from Tilverton in this game, you get attacked by this group of hippogriffs. And it's very annoying, these outdoor battles. There are 2 of them I have to deal with. And again, fireballs only have a limited... they have a more limited range outdoors, more limited AoE. So that's a little bit annoying. It's a bit harder to blow them all up, plus all the trees and stuff in the way on this wonderful little terrain map. But it's just something we have to deal with. Unfortunately, it's a small amount of experience, too. In first edition, AD&D usually didn't get a lot of experience from fighting most monsters. Most of your experience came from getting treasure and sometimes doing quests. Later games would ask more from actual quests, but in the first 2 games, pretty much all of your quest experience is from the treasure that you're rewarded for completing the quest. But we have to be careful with the Necklaces of Missiles again, because friendly fire is a thing, and if you're wearing a Necklace of Missiles, if you have it ready and you put a character on quick combat, they will use the Necklace of Missiles, and they just throw it at the nearest enemy, so it blows up in the face and damages the party, so it's a little bit of a problem that I have to, if I'm wanting to use quick combat, I have to make sure to take off my necklaces before I do so. So now after Ashpenford, we can finally do our training in the Ashpenford. Well, we rest first. I usually like to train and then rest, though sometimes I forget. I need to identify a little bit of items so I have money. In order to train in this game, you have to have 1,000 gold or 200 platinum, because the game pretty much automatically turns most of your money into platinum if you do anything with it. Visiting a shop and spending a bit of money by IDing something or buying arrows is useful to change a bunch of your chump change into platinum and maybe a little bit of gold. A lot more important in Pool of Radiance, but something I have to do on occasion here. A money route is kind of a difficult thing because there are a couple of random things of money you can get. Various ways to earn money, but it's just kind of a little sidetrack thing you have to watch for. But I need to have roughly about 1,000 gold total on my fighter magic user, and then about 800-ish, 600 to 800 on the rest of my characters to level them all up. The paladins and the fighters 600, the cleric I believe 800. I think she gets up to level 9, maybe even level 10, so she might need 1,000 too. So the first place we have to go to is Hap. In our first journey from Asembra, the little green town, to Hap, we get attacked by 3 black dragons. Dragons are a major interesting enemy in first edition. Later editions, like second edition and onward, dragons are incredibly powerful. If you fought any of the dragons in Baldur's Gate 2, you know how powerful they are. Icewind Dale, I think you fight some dragons. They have like several hundred hit points. Dragons in first edition, by comparison, are relatively glass cannons. These are ancient huge black dragons, the biggest black dragons in the oldest age, and they only have 48 hit points. However, their breath weapons do damage equal to their maximum hit points, so that's 48 points of damage, 24 if I make a saving throw. Luckily, they're not programmed to breathe after moving. They will only breathe if they start their turn in range of a character. So I need to wait for them. Waiting for the enemy is often a good topic when you have this, and I can't really use Dust of Disappearance here because its range is a lot harder to use in battle. It's not really worth it to waste it here, and I can't use it before the battle because I'm traveling. It has a very long duration, but not long enough to, hours or days of traveling between city locations and such. It's one of the other problems with the outdoor thing. So I got a nice breath attack there. He made his saving throw, so only took 24, and I was lucky that he targeted a character where the line of AoE did not hit. With the low graphics in this game, it's oftentimes hard to tell what AoEs or where AoEs are going and what's hitting, but it's something we deal with. So now we move down to the second area. The game is actually semi-open. There are 3 areas you can visit after leaving Tilverton and the Fire Knives. 3 of the enemies. You're expected to go in a certain order. They do have a progression, and when you reach the Standing Stone, there's an old man who sits there who talks to you and tells you which direction you should go. Seek red to the south. Seek green to the north. Seek black to the north. And we find out later this is Tyranthraxus hidden, telling you where to find his allies who have also been bonded to you. Tyranthraxus is the big boss who's put these bonds on us, and he was also the big boss in Pool of Radiance trying for revenge here. But he gives you the level description, so this is the next area. It's just actually faster by path to go this way, in addition to being useful for difficulty. Now, as we enter the city of Hap, it's ruled by a bunch of dark elves and an Efreet who are serving Dracandros, one of this great wizard who is trying to make a name for himself, who's put a bonds on us for some really weird reasons. We'll get to that in a minute. But as you're wandering around Hap, there is an NPC you can recruit, Akbar Belikosh, who is a major character in the Azure Bonds novel, which is kind of the prequel to this game. This game is a semi-sequel, sort of sequel to the Azure Bonds novel. And all the characters in there you meet here, including a few that have been around that I haven't really talked about. But Akbar Belikosh is useless because he's a mage and we're fighting Dark Elves. Dark Elves in D&D have a very powerful magic resistance. They have a minimum of 50%, meaning 50% of your spells won't work on them. So it's not worth it to try and use Necklaces of Missiles or to fireball them because they'll mostly just resist and I'll waste charges. Necklaces of Missiles do have a limited number of charges, which is why I multiplied so many of them, so I can get through the entire game using them as much as possible. But this section, they don't work. A bit inconvenient, and you might think that maybe it might be better to do a higher level area first where I can actually use the Necklaces of Missiles, since that would break me through quicker and then I'd be higher level to deal with these guys without it. Maybe. I haven't really tested that much yet. I think that the levels are better the way they are because, again, pathing just on the world map is a lot more fluid this way as well. They have a chance of running away. If the enemies do reach the other screen and are able to escape, as that one did, I don't get experience for them, but that's all right. I've got enough experience. But now I need to actually leave the city and go back to level up. Now, there are a bunch of patrols here that you can fight, and that will diminish the number of enemies in this final room, which would be useful under normal circumstances if you're playing the game casually. Wipe out the patrols, and then you deal with less in the big fight. But since I have Dust of Disappearance, I don't need to worry about all those casters. All those Dark Elves are casters, by the way. That's one of the reasons Dust of Disappearance is great. All of those are casters, but they can't cast on me because I'm invisible. No hold person spells, no lightning bolts. They love to spam those. Your party will die fast, especially if you take all of them on. Now, if I recruit Akbar Belikosh, the useless NPC, which is sad because he's cool. He's a mage. His spells will not work on the Dark Elves. They'll just resist everything. He'll throw fireballs, and because NPCs are controlled by the computer just as if they're on permanent quick combat, so he will throw his fireballs at the feet of the party and blow the party up trying to hit one enemy. So he's useless for that. You can't let him use his only fireball spell, so he has no good 5th level spells, and most of the spells he wants to use on the Dark Elves won't work anyway because they're resistant. And if you meet enemies in the street after recruiting Akbar, he will start fights with them as well, so we totally ignore him in the speedrun. Sad to say, Akbar was really cool in the book. I like Akbar, but he's very useless to us. But we needed to get that experience to make sure that our fighter mage could reach 5th level so I could get the haste spell. That's very important for a fight coming up. And I don't get quite enough experience in the first portion of the game to be able to do that. I have to come in and clear this out first, which is a slight time loss. If I could work that experience in a little bit earlier without spending too much time, it'd save me a little bit. I also always forget to use Dust of Disappearance before coming in here, but it's actually important to do because even though I'm leaving the city and following these trails to caves, no time actually passes in a lot of map transitions and such. So my Dust of Disappearance is still active if I use it before this battle, and it makes it a little bit easier. Unfortunately, it's also tight corridors. My characters are mostly using pretty much stuck on melee now with this +3 longsword. They don't even want to use ranged weapons because of that. And again, immune to fireballs. Salamanders are one of the few enemies that are actually immune to fire. Even Afridi and red dragons are not immune to fire spells. They will be affected by it. So the first thing I did was go south here. You can flee from enemies, which is nice, but some enemies will not fight you because of Silk's mark, though. I go south, and this dark elf named Silk, who kind of likes humans, she's a kind of semi-heroic figure in Forgotten Realms lore. She's now leading this group of mercenaries called the Swan Maze, and it only takes female adventurers, and she wants to make one of your characters an honorary Swan May, gives them a mark, and in return for that she wants you to get a dragon egg or a dragon heart for her, which we don't bother getting because we don't bother completing most side quests like that, but we need this mark for a couple of reasons. It's minorly helpful in these caves because it makes some of the enemies who are allied with Silk, it will show the portrait of the Dark Elf, and that means that they are allies of Silk who see the mark of the Swan Maze on your character, and so they leave you alone. But since you can just run away in these caves and it's not a problem, you just take a step back. It's not a huge deal, but it's minorly helpful, especially if I react better. This is a required fight I have to chop through, not usually much of a problem, but next coming up is a Dracolich. Dracolich is one of the 2 characters in the game that has a spell-like ability that can target you even after you've been dusted. So I didn't use Dust in the previous fight either for some reason. I go ahead and use my Haste spell for a powerful buff, as well as Bless and Prayer, 2 good buff spells from clerics that give you an increased chance to hit and resist effects. So every turn he gets this Paralytic Gaze, which luckily did not work, and he can use that even if you have Dust of Disappearance on for whatever reason. Luckily, he has like 80 hit points, which is a lot the same as an Ancient Red Dragon, but we got lucky and took him down pretty quick. Now we ascend up to the tower. Dracandros teleports us to the top, and he tries to convince these dragons that the humans are going to war against them. And he creates an illusion of a dragon and orders us to attack it, and the bonds compel us. And then he tries to say, see, the humans are after you. And the dragons are like, we're not that stupid. Release your control of them and we'll see what happens. And you get a chance to attack with the dragons or do something else, but as long as you don't attack the dragons or speak badly to them, they'll say, okay, we know this is gone, and they'll leave. With Dust of Disappearance, it wouldn't be a bad battle because they can't breathe on me, but it's a lot of dragons, and it's slow, and we don't want to bother with that fight, so we ignore it. And then instead we attack the wizard. He runs away and leaves these guards. We kill the guards. I grab some drow chainmail here because it's slightly better than plate mail. Drow items are made of adamantine in Forgotten Realms lore, and so they turn to dust when the sunlight hits them. But as long as I'm in Dracandros' tower, the Dark Elf caves, the Dracolich cave, and the area of Hap, these areas are obscured from the sunlight somehow. They're in darkness, and so you can use drow items. But the minute that we leave the area, we'll lose them. But they're very useful because they give me a 12 movement, while when I wear plate mail, I only have a 6 movement normally. So just throwing these on my characters, especially since I'm charging into melee, will be very useful for this portion of the game. I'm about to get the one piece of real good magic armor that I pick up in the game. One of 2, and I don't forget to bother looting it, but it's not until a little bit later in the game. Sometimes in some earlier routes, I would multiply this armor up as well to the entire party, but I don't bother because I don't really need it that badly. This is the fight where it'd be useful to have, and it doesn't help. Now, this guy is a Dark Elf Lord. He's a high-level fighter. He has over 100 hit points, a -7 armor class because he's wearing +3 plate mail and a +2 shield, which I will get to loot off his body. He also has a +5 Drow longsword, which I can equip and use for the remainder of this session, for this adventure against Dracandros. But because of that, he's really hard to hit. Plus, we have a negative status effect on us in this battle, which is he has a symbol of pain on his shield, which is a high-level spell, which you don't really get to use much in the Forgotten Realms Gold Box games. Defeated one of my characters, which is moderately bad. You can bandage to prevent them from dying. Normally in D&D, when you reach 0 hit points, you're dead, at least in the first couple editions. But they actually made it slightly nice in this game. You're unconscious at 0, then you go to dying at -1 to -9, and you die at -10 or more. So if you're unconscious, you don't get hit points. If you're dead, you don't, or experience points. If you're dead, you don't get experience points. But we can revive the character and continue on, which we're going to do. This is the reason I want the haste spell, because this character is really, really difficult. I cast hold person spells on him. He has very high magic resistance. It's a low chance of hitting, but the cleric has a low chance of hitting anyway with attacks at all. So if I get lucky, it means I one-shot him and the battle's easy. If not, this can go very badly. And I have wiped multiple times in this fight. This is actually the hardest fight in the game, and the biggest argument possibly in favor of changing up my route and coming after it when I'm higher level. But now I get to loot him. I ignore this room, which is really cool, but I don't even have time to talk about it because... but it's the room of an orb of obliteration, and you duel a mage with it and get a lot more money than you can possibly carry. There's an illusion of the Dark Elf Lord here. He will actually take your items if you surrender to him, but if you attack him, he just disappears and puff of smoke and illusion. I don't know how an illusion takes stuff from you. This is one of the few areas in the game where I pretty much don't worry about running away from battle. I don't bother about, rather quitting and reloading and making sure I safety save, because there are usually fewer enemies, and this is actually one of the longer ones because they're such a far distance away. But, yeah. But 4 enemies is the most that you'll usually see, so I go ahead and fight these battles. They also have gems, which I always pick up just out of habit, although I don't really need to. I have a few other pieces of armor and such. If I get bad luck, I can get a lot of battles here, but it's still generally a bit easier. Sometimes quick combat's pretty crazy. This is the second best fight to get 3 Dark Elves. There are 4 different encounters you can get. One with 3 Dark Elves, one with 4, one with 3 Salamanders, and one with like an Afridi and 4 Dark Elves, and that's the worst one to get. But 3 to 5 enemies is not very bad. Even with their pretty good armor classes, we chop through them pretty quickly. We have a set encounter coming up against Owlbears and Dark Elves. Owlbears, the great and wonderful, well-known D&D critter. Luckily, owlbears can be blown up with fireballs. It's a rather inconvenient map location. It's difficult to target as many owlbears as I'd like, but there's still a couple areas I can blow up a lot of owlbears, and there's an off chance that I can do some damage to a couple of the Dark Elves in the area as well by throwing these fireballs out. So pretty much every time in the game where I can hit multiple enemies with fireballs, it's generally good to use the necklaces of missiles, which is why I spend so much time multiplying up so many of them, because it saves a lot of time trying to chop them down, and a lot of RNG. There's RNG, of course, on the damage as well, how much you roll, whether they save, but it is an automatic hit on all the enemies you target it with, and it's multiple enemies at once, while if I attack, I'm not even guaranteed of hitting in the first place. So always better to use Necklace of Missiles with the fireballs if you have the chance. Just multiply up these cheesy items and blow the enemy away. A lucky 8 damage to a Dark Elf fighter. Going back to quick combat, and so again, removing my necklaces so that I don't blow up my own party. The Cleric with only an 18 strength is not as effective in melee. There's quite a difference between the stats in this game. First edition stats were really weird. Second edition kept most of that. They finally went away in third edition. But with strength, not only do you have a 3 to 18 range, but if you're a fighter and you have an 18 strength, you roll percentile dice, a D100, to see from 0-1 to 0-0, which is 100, how much exceptional strength you have.
And so an 18-100 strength, 18-0-0, you have a +3 chance to hit and +6 damage with melee weapons. While on the other hand, if you just have an 18, you only get +1 to hit and only do +2 damage. So the cleric isn't all that great in melee, but their spells are very necessary, including only good healing spells. Now at the bottom of this floor I ran into a paper. It's a really weird thing. There's an evil magic rune trap on the paper, and if you try and read it, pick it up and read it, it blows up and does damage to you. But there's a pit trap on the next floor, and supposedly if you disarm the trap on the runes, you'll be able to go down that pit and not take damage from it. But I have never gotten it to work properly, and it's not worth... I've tried saving and reloading and stuff and seeing if there's any chance. Supposedly a magic user has a better chance of understanding and reading the runes properly, but I've never seen it work. Maybe I did once when I was a little kid playing it casually, but never... When I was first speedrunning this, I spent 15 minutes trying to read that paper, never got it successful once. So I just have to come down these stairs, take the damage from the spike pits. A lot of damage, nasty, but then just move on. This is the last level, and then we're done with Dracandros just about. We have 2 battles left. First against Wyverns. Luckily, Wyverns are not immune to fireballs. This can be a pretty nasty fight if you don't do it right, because Wyverns have a chance to poison, and just like sleep and all other status elements in the game, it's really nasty. You think they're bad in a game like, in a game like Mystic Quest. Status ailments in general, pretty much everything is instant death in D&D 1st edition. If you're poisoned, you die. And then you have to not only be resurrected, but first you have to have neutralized poison cast on you, or your character will just die again after they get resurrected. So it's really absurd. It's worse than instant death, and which is crazy because poison is generally a lower level-ish spell or effect considered versus instant death attacks. So we don't want to melee with the Wyverns if we possibly can. Luckily, even though they're in a line which isn't the best for melee and they're huge, so we can't get super amount of groups in the fireball effects, we can still hit 3 to 4 most of the time. And so the fireballs will make relatively quick work of them. And once again, because we have Dust of Disappearance on, they can't see us, so they won't charge us. They just sit there and take the fireballs and wait for us. Now, this game does allow multiple kinds of, a lot of really exceptional tactical decisions. You can delay your turn until the end of the turn so that you can act after enemies. You could also guard so that if an enemy comes up to you and you're holding a melee weapon, you will attack them automatically. And most of the time, if the enemy can't do anything, they will guard. But Dust of Disappearance also makes you immune to being hit by a ready guard attack, basically, or whatever you want to call it. So I can run up and attack them when I'm mostly done with them, but it's still generally faster and quicker to blow them up with fireballs anyway. I think I only have the one left and it's dead, so because the map there's no way to zoom out the map, you can only see about a 7x7 square at a time, so it's sometimes difficult to tell what's here. So now that this is the final battle against Dracandros, I'll cast my Bless and Prayer spells. My Haste spell. Haste is powerful because it doubles both your movement and your number of attacks. Which, once we start getting higher level, that means we'll get up to 3 attacks a round, or 4 if we're using ranged bows specifically, which we don't really in this game, but other games you would get 4 attacks with bows instead of 2. Now, you can't target Dracandros because he has an invisibility effect on, similar to that. We can still see him, though, so you don't run into invisible enemies often, so I can't remember how Goldbox always handles them. I think you always see them on the map, but you can't target them unless if they're invisible. But again, we can target that Dark Elf right there and hit him with fireballs. Main reason we're doing this is to prevent him from casting other spells, which can still be dangerous. The most dangerous thing he can do is a Fire Shield spell, which is a very powerful damage shield. If he casts Fire Shield on himself, then if we hit him in melee, we take the same amount of damage that we deal to him. So we can kill ourselves pretty darn fast with that. And the Ifriti can do decent attacks here. Now, the Ifriti are damaged by Fireball, amazingly, though they take half damage, so it's not worth it to continue using it on them because... Or I guess they resist 25%, I think, because they were taking either 7 or 3. Or they might take a third if it was a 21 damage in Dracandros saves, I'm not sure. But in any case, they resist a decent amount of fire damage, so it's usually not worth it to throw fireballs at them. A bit of extra little bit of damage while I'm taking out Dracandros isn't bad, but again, main reason I want to throw the fireballs there is so that Dracandros will not have an opportunity to cast spells. But now that I've dealt with him, I can turn my characters to auto, and just because of the faster run times and the fact the Frostbrand brand weapon that we have is especially good against Tefriti, though, because it's a frost weapon. Again, elements in first edition D&D were not yet in the completed stage. They would be in later role-playing games and later editions of D&D. So you're not guaranteed to do double damage to fire enemies with cold, for instance, or other effects that you'd see. But the Frostbrand is programmed, and it is described in its description in the Dungeon Master's Guide of Magic Items, that it is a +6 weapon when attacking fire-using or fire-based creatures like salamanders, Tefriti, and red dragons. Unfortunately, we don't encounter any red dragons in this game, so the Frostbrand effect isn't good for that, but Dracandros has many magical items that are useful, including a wand of fireballs and a wand of ice storms, which for my mage will effectively replace the necklaces of missiles. Because the wand of fireballs has more reliable fireball damage, has a better range. The range of necklace of missiles is a lot shorter than a normal fireball is, so I have to run up before I can use it. The wand of fireballs has like a 12 to 15, maybe even 20 range, something pretty high. Ice Storm not quite as much, but it's ice-based, so it will affect more enemies than the fireballs will, especially in the next area. And it has a slightly smaller AoE, but it's more controllable and can't be resisted. And I usually get unlucky and get another Dark Elf fight on my way out, but it's just an annoyance more than anything. But with this, Dracandros is defeated, and we have recovered the first. There are 3 items that are mentioned as plot MacGuffins. They are key items that don't actually take up a inventory slot, and the way the game handles them is actually just a flag. Do you have this? Yes. You get a random encounter. This I turned into a donation incentive. You meet a Bridge of Death, and you have to tell them what your quest is, what your favorite fruit is, and answer a letter. And so we'll spend some time with that. It happens randomly at some point, but at some point during the game I will run into this chasm. It is supposed to be a copyright protection. You were given a code wheel with this game, which is really cool. You match up Elven and Dwarven runes that it tells you, and then it gives you a letter or a number, translate, some sort of single character. And that was done, but this is the Grand Old Games download version, and they disabled the copyright protection, so you don't have to worry about it when you start the game or when you reach this chasm. There are a few other uses for it, but they're not really needed in this game, especially if you have a guidebook. All the kinds of code words that you could translate are given in the clue book that comes with the game in PDF format. So, or you can look it up on GameFAQs or whatever, but that's only in the later games. One of the items I got is a wonderful Ring of Wizardry, which is not as useful in the speedrun as it would be in casual play, but it doubles the amount of first, second, and third level spells you can memorize, which means you get a lot of magic missiles if you want to spam those. Again, since we have a fighter mage, not a big problem. I have a bunch of other magic items like Ring of Protection and Bracers of Armor class that I throw on my fighter mage just so that he has more protection and movement to maneuver around. Now we're moving on to Ulash, the second area. Green-robed people follow us generally. We want to avoid the roads, though, here, because if we travel the roads, we'll generally get attacked by either red plumes or by fire knives dressed up as guards or trying to get revenge on us. As we come into here, I messed up this area a little bit. You're supposed to meet with the guards immediately, but as long as you don't fight them and go with them, you'll come into this room and you have a chance to impress the commander. There are some Zentrim spies who come bursting through here. If you fight them, it automatically guarantees that the commander likes you, but they are... not really a very difficult fight, but it is a long, involved fight. We don't want to do it. So instead, we let them go. Now, he does like you more if you talk to the guards and not fight them, if you don't try to sneak in. He likes you more if you have a Swan May, which is the reason I got the Swan May thing here. It gives me a chance of impressing the commander, even without attacking the spies. Without the Swan May and without answering properly haughty or nice, which he likes, sly and meek characters he doesn't like, or abusive. Those are the 5 options you have when you talk to people of how you want your character to sound, what kind of personality you're trying to exude. I accidentally started the fight here, so now I have to reload. It was kind of good because I hadn't actually seen it, and I was wondering just how bad this fight was. But there's a multitude of Zentrim spies. This isn't a spy or two that happened to sneak in here as I was busting through. This is a whole war party. How on earth did they sneak in here? Anyway, We don't want to fight them, though, because that's long and involved, and I haven't even had a chance to use Dust of Disappearance yet. I had a chance, but I didn't bother, so I definitely don't want to fight them, because they have nasty spells. So, we avoid fighting the thieves, and eventually we impress the commander. For whatever reason, whenever I play this game, the first time I attempt to impress the commander, it fails, and he says, "You're looters," and he starts a fight. So I had to quit and reload. And then the second time, after I reload and try it again, the RNG is favorable with me. I'm not quite sure how the RNG seed works in this game, but it does seem to be relatively consistent, because that seems to always happen. You can fight these looters. They don't like you. They're red plumes from Hills Far who are fighting with the Zhentarim over this city, but they are but that group you run into is a group of deserters, and they think you're going to report them back, so they will fight you if you don't run away. Here, this is a set encounter. I need to use Dust of Disappearance. I need to get all the other things ready. And unfortunately, once again, it's an area that's hard to use fireballs because things are too close. I needed to go to a shop and identify these wands. I forgot to. So, I don't know which wand is which. These mages start with a minor globe of invulnerability, which is really annoying. It makes them immune to first, second, and third level spells. It's a 4th level spell that you can cast. And once again, they can also cast Fire Shield. These are actually pretty high level mages. They're higher level than my mages, and he got a Fire Shield off, so you can see I took a couple of explosions on poor Green. So I was trying to hit them. I need to use the Wand of Ice Storm, but since I forgot to identify the wands and I didn't know which was which, I had to be careful. Using the Ice Storm wand is right up at the top is preferable. I can hit the 3 mages without damaging any of my characters. The cleric is in the corner. He's no threat since I'm invisible. If I wasn't, he would cast hold person spells on me, and they're called hold person spells because it's hold person is the name of the spell. It's not hold people, even though it affects multiple people. But since he can't target us, he's no threat. He surrenders. Morale is in this game. They will run away. They will also surrender sometimes, which removes them automatically from combat and gives you their experience and their loot, which is really convenient when it happens. It happens a lot more in Pool of Radiance, and there are a lot bigger enemies, groups that you fight, but clerics tend to surrender a lot more than a lot of other enemy classes that you meet. And this was a really bad thing for me here. I got this random encounter. I did save beforehand, though, so it isn't that bad. Again, I recorded this run previously, so I don't remember everything that happened in it, and I actually got a slightly... I actually PB on this run, but I got an even better PB when I ran online stream Saturday morning. So I'm sometimes I'm remembering these things that happen, and sometimes I'm remembering the wrong one. But I got into a fight there too, and I forgot to save beforehand, so more of those red plumes, but you can run away from them. For whatever reason, some of the enemies you can run from here and others not. This is a common thing in the gold box games. Whether you can run from a battle or not is determined by the area you're in, and sometimes even your encounter groups, and it varies from area to area within each game. So this is a rather nasty place. Luckily, we're not in Ulash very long, although the Pit of Moander is kind of bad too. It has a low encounter rate, but the encounters are really hard to run from most of the time. But this is a set encounter, and this gives us a really awesome item here. Ulash is the domain of the Cult of Moander, for the most part. The city's been destroyed by war between the Zhentarim and the Hillsfar Red Plumes, but most particularly, a pit trap here I can't avoid because I don't have a thief or a dwarf, but it's a minor mad damage, and it's not worth having those characters otherwise. Again, I don't have any thieves in my party because there are really not any really useful areas in the game where a thief would do me any good, so... Moander Fanatics attack, again, immediately. At least I can fireball... cultists down, but still it's generally not a fight I want to get into if I can possibly avoid it. In the Cult of Moander, though, we come into this pit where the Pit of Moander, where the cult is ruling, and they were one of the main antagonists in the actual Azure Bonds. Elias and Dragonbait are the two characters here. They're on the cover of both the game and the book. They actually took the cover from the book and made it the cover for the game as well. We'll actually pick them up in here. And Elias was the first one who was bonded. She's actually an artificial human who was created by the Nameless Bard, a character of lore in the Forgotten Realms, so you may recognize. I want to rest because I've taken a lot of damage. and you can rest best in a room where you've cleared the enemy. So I take this extra encounter just so I can rest as a safety mechanism. Normally I would avoid this fight in doing that otherwise. But I come in here for that because these Vegapygmies die easy to fireballs. But the Cult of Moander is trying to resurrect their god because Moander died. He's a god of filth, sludge, and slime. And he's temporarily resurrected through Elias somehow in Azure Bonds. It's been a while since I've read the book, so I don't remember the exact reasons why. But the Cult of Moander is now trying to use your party to do the same thing. Just the extra dimensional power of these bonds, because Dragonbait was summoned through the bonds from another world to give a soul to Elias. Again, very complicated. Don't have time to explain it all. But we have to battle them. Because Moander is a god of sludge and slime, some of his major minions that serve the cult are shambling mounds. Really nasty enemies at this point in the game. Very low armor class, a lot of hit points. They attack with the sledge and can engulf your characters if they manage to hit twice. And they're immune to fireballs. They only take half damage from cold, and they actually get healed by lightning. So we can't do much to them. Luckily, one of the wands that we picked up, one was a wand of lightning from this set encounter right before entering the pit up in Ulash. But the other is called a Wand of Defoliation, and it exists pretty much only for this dungeon, just like the Drow items do in the other place. Here's Elias and Dragonbait. We meet them here. We have them join the party because it's a little bit faster than trying to run through all the rest of the dialogue or trying to fight them or anything like that. And then here's the final boss right here. So, but the Wand of Defoliation does a short mini cone or mini line of 3 squares is the max it'll do, but it will hit all shambling mounds in that line or Vegapygmies and do roughly 10 to 30 damage to them, usually in the 20s. It usually almost always hits high rather than low in the damage range. So it will decimate these shambling mounds really fast. And it doesn't hurt the party either, so because it only hurts plant creatures. So it goes right through my party, and I can use it at will and decimate these things. Any character can use it as well, so it's not really it takes a little bit too much time to multiply stuff, but that is a possible option, especially if you're playing casually, to multiply the Wand of Defoliation. Everyone used it. So I'm not even sure why, but for whatever reason, the ritual to summon and resurrect Moander with the party fails, and our bond disappears. And so now we have to fight Mogion, the High Priestess, and the rest of her cult and the Shambling Mounds. And then we have to fight pieces of Moander, which is one of the tougher fights in the game, except that we're invisible so they can't see us. And again, all of these are clerics who could cast hold person spells on us and make us helpless and easily one-shot us, but they can't target us because of that. The Shambling Mounds can attack but have a less chance to hit. This is just a really grand old time here. I hit 2 with it. It was about the same as I would before. It's kind of hard to aim the line properly to get multiple characters sometimes. If you're straight on going across, that's the best way since they're too tall. You can hit 3 in a line easy. If it's at an angle, it's a little bit harder to work. The cleric can use a necklace of missiles because that's the most effective thing to do the most damage to Mogion and the rest of the clerics. Mogion's a high-level cleric, has a lot of HP. She also has a +3 plate mail and a +2 shield, as well as a cloak of displacement, which is worth a flat 2 armor class in this game in addition. I'm not sure how much the game integrates the other effects the cloak of displacement has, because it has a bunch of different things like regarding missile weapons and like a chance to hit concealment kind of thing because of how it functions. But at the very minimum, it's a free plus or -2 armor class on any character, so it's really useful. And if I really was concerned about taking damage or such things, I'd multiply my plate mail, shields, and the cloak of displacement here after fighting her, because that could be I could give all my characters a -9 armor class basically. But we're finishing up this fight, and then we have to fight the bits of Moander, which are basically 100 hit point super shambling mounds. So 3 100 hit point super shambling mounds is our next fight. And again, that would be a really tough fight casually. If I were playing I had to hit my character, but I figured he had enough hit points to take it. I wanted to finish off Mogion with that necklace, and I didn't get, again, limited range on the necklace. Since they are shambling mounds, they're immune to fireballs as well, which is a bit troublesome. But +3 mace as well, if I wanted to give that to my cleric, though she would also turn into a mad meleeer. She wouldn't bother to use her staff sling anymore if she had a +3 mace. And her getting into the mix offensively just isn't worth it generally. She's mostly a buff and heal bot character, though, again, and a necklace user which we'll be using plenty of in the next section. We'll finally get a chance to really make use of those. So here's the bits of Moander in the Super Shambling Mound. Speaking of which, Elias and Dragonbait automatically controlled. They're better than Akbar Belakash because all they do is shoot arrows and they occasionally take things out for me. They have a decent chance to hit, even if arrows only do 1 to 6 points of damage each. They do get to attack twice. I always try to hit multiple bits of Moander, but only one will ever actually be hit. I'm not quite sure why, how the thing is programmed and why it won't hit in line. The Wand of Defoliation is not a normal magic item in the original first edition AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, which I have read extensively. I grew up playing first edition AD&D, so I know a lot about first edition. But I don't remember the Wand of Defoliation. It might have been in one of the supplemental books that I never had as a kid. So I don't know its exact functioning rules of the 3-square line that it has. But even though it'll affect 3 Shambling Mounds in a row, it will only hit 1 bit of Moander. Still, it's a guaranteed 20-ish damage to a bit of Moander, so that's pretty hefty.
It's a ray.
Ronnie,
it's a ray.
Yeah. In any case, we'll finish off these guys, and then we have to leave, and we're going to be attacked fanatically. We have a little bit more chance of being attacked here, but again, the encounter rate is not as bad as in other places in the game. So I think we might get a couple of battles. This is one of the areas where I'm kind of ambivalent as to whether it's worth it to save and reload or not. And we get our next MacGuffin, the Gauntlet of Moander. We need these 3 items, the Helm of Dragons, Gauntlet of Moander, and Amulet of Lathander in order to vanquish Tyrant Thraxus. They're kind of a moot point, though, because by the time any of them have any effect, you have to have all 3 of them. It won't let you go to Tyrant Thraxus until you've defeated these other 3, and they only have an effect in the final areas, the last 3 dungeon areas when you're going to confront Tyrant Thraxus anyway, so it's whatever. Interestingly, though, the triggers in the game are based on finding these items rather than actually having your bonds removed. Even though you might lose your bond in the earlier fight, until you get the item, like you get it early in Dracandros, you get it early in the next area, the Cave of the Beholder, you lose your bonds before you defeat the boss and get to take his item. But there have been times when I've transferred characters over and then did a little bit too much of the manipulating, copying of items, that I have deactivated triggers in the game. Whenever I played it casually, it isn't something I've run into, but it's kind of become a little bit of a neurosis for me. I'm a little bit afraid of things happening because I've soft-locked the game in this way. Again, I only did it when I did a transfer, Pool of Radiance, transferred the character's Curse of the Azure Bonds in a speedrun, but it's happened to me a couple times and once soft-locked my game. Sometimes some triggers get deactivated when I've done that too often, and so fights won't progress. And one of the fights that didn't progress this one time I was running it was the Cave of the Beholder. The final battle with the Beholder where I get the Amulet of Lathander from. So I didn't have to fight against the Beholder on my way out, which is great. And we're going to see, he kills the guy who gives you who has the bond, so you lose it. But when I tried to go anywhere, it didn't recognize that I'd lost my 4th bond. It still thought that characters react to you based on your bonds, as if you have them out in the open, that you're showing your arm to everybody at bare skin with these bonds on it. And so if you have the Zentrim bond on you, the people of Hillsfar and other people treat you as if you're a character of the Zentarim. Some like you and some don't. And so the people of Hillsfar still wouldn't deal with me, even though I wasn't supposed to have the bond anymore, because that's where the trigger is. Just a minor thing, but something that I have observed before. And not a lot else to talk about at this point as I'm making my escape. This is another set group of things. This is actually the room I cleared earlier, but in order to rest and get my hit points back, but because everything is reset now that I've killed the High Priest and the God killed Moander again. But I'm making my escape now. Only one battle should be left. Those slugs are always there, but you can always evade slugs whether you encounter them in the field or if they're a set encounter or whatever. But here's the final fight, kind of big, but lots of clerics to blow up and other fun things to do. Once again, I usually will refresh my dust at some point in this dungeon. It lasts for a long time, but it doesn't last forever, and I'd rather have it make sure that it's going rather than have it run out in the middle of a fight or right before a big fight. If these guys all start casting a hold person on me, and the battle can turn sour very quickly. You can, of course, play these games, win these games without it, but it's so much easier to have this. If I were to do a glitchless run of this game, I would be attempting to do it without multiplying up the Necklace of Missiles and Dust of Disappearance, without doing this trick. There are a couple different ways I could phrase that, too. I could call it quote-unquote glitchless, or I could just say set party only, because this is a kind of outside of the effect game that allows me to... I am going outside of the game in a way by adding and removing characters while my game is in progress. And so basically I would come up with some sort of phrasing to forbid the changing of characters in the middle of the game. That's the only thing that makes the multiplying of equipment really possible, is adding and removing characters. If I didn't remove characters, I couldn't do it. And by the same token, again, that's why this is an any % new game run. I say that specifically to differentiate it from the potential new game plus run, where I would start over with a full party, because especially with the way that works, if this were a true any % would be a new game plus, because it would be a lot faster if I already had all the equipment that I needed, and everybody had -9 armor class and +5 swords, and girdles of Storm Giant strength for 24 strength with +7 to hit and +12 damage. I think maybe it's 6 and 12, something outrageously high. I don't have that memorized because it's a lot higher than you normally get in the game. But it's very high. 6 or 7 to hit and about 12 damage. I think 25 is 14, +14 damage, regardless. That's one of the last items you get in the game that I think I will be picking up. Yeah, I always grab it because it's pretty quick to do so. Helps me avoid one fight actually going to pick up that. I fight another fight, but it's a lot easier one. But now I defeated the Cult of Moander. We only have 2 areas left. The next area is just a stone's throw away. And usually I don't get enough experience here to level up, so I believe that I do head to... Nope, I have already learned to skip it. Okay, so I don't bother going here. I go into the city. So in Zentil Keep, there are some encounters you can get, but you can talk your way past all of them. It's kind of weird. Sometimes I will... Again, I think it's an RNG load scene. Most of the time I don't get any encounters, but I get a couple in this area. Something really weird happens on this run in particular. You can talk your way past these people. If you try and run away, you don't get away. They start combat with you. Again, it's a really weird place. You have to talk sly to mages, nice to priests, and meek to warriors, and they'll leave you alone. Now, the bond suddenly makes me attack these people, these mages here. Apparently, these mages are enemies of Fazal, the High Priest of Bane of the Zentarim. Because they're evil people, they have warring factions against each other. We're about to see that firsthand as it happens. So this is an unusual thing. Luckily, of course, with my multitude of powerful AoE items, I can quickly burn them down. So it's not a huge deal, but it's a little bit annoying. Most of the time, in my earlier runs, before I slightly adjusted the route, I never got encounters here at all. Because, just again, I think it's RNG seeds of how things have been progressing with encounters. I'm not quite sure how it is. I don't have the know-how of programming to delve in and see what's going on. But when I did my run Saturday morning, I also got encounters. I managed to avoid this one, but again, this has only happened these last 2 times when I've skipped going to Voonlar first to try and level up, because I don't have enough experience to level any of my characters, so I cut that from the route. But now we meet Olive Ruskettle, another character from the Azure Bonds book, and she sneaks us into the Temple of Bane so that we can rescue her friend, the Sage Dimswort. Dimswort joins us, but he just follows along. He's a nobody, so for the most part he does nothing. We enter the Cave of the Beholder with the help of this hooded woman, but we're brought before this beholder, and he wants to study the bonds that Fazal, the High Priest, put on us. He's of an opposing faction. Even though they both serve Bane, they both serve the Zentarim. They are opposing factions. They hate each other, and they're trying to one-up each other, and he thinks, oh, Fazal's very impressed with these humans and half-elf, these good guys, these good adventurers that he's put these weird bonds on. I want to find out what they're about. So he tries to capture us, but then Fazal bursts in. They have an argument. he says, these guys are under my protection as long as I live. The beholder says, then die, and that won't happen. So he zaps Fazal. We lose our bond. And so this is a point where I should no longer have his Zentrum bond, but because the beholder fight later on was skipped in one of my runs, I didn't get it. And so now the two factions are battling each other in the middle of this room. So it's a very high encounter rate. So depending on how it goes, I chose this route to go ahead and fight through all of these battles. I'm still not quite sure which is faster, but I think it's actually faster to save and reload. And I kind of proved it here because I end up taking a long time with this escape because I decided, with necklaces of missiles, I can blow these guys up fast enough. It might be better to go ahead and fight. But turns out that I lose a bit of time on this route because of that. So for the most part, I'm going to try to avoid more of the battles during the escape. This isn't too bad a place for it, though, because it is very wide open. I can target a lot of enemies with my necklaces and missiles. This is where they see extensive use in the game. But I do... the good news is these guys are actually worth a lot of experience because they have a decent amount of magic items, which actually increases their experience potential more than a equivalently statted enemy would have. Plus the spellcasters give extra experience because they have special abilities. That's what really builds up experience from monster encounters. I make note of that because in my PB, I ended up just not having enough experience to level up my paladin to level 8 before the final battle while my fighters made level 8, which kind of is a... I don't really need it, but it would be it would be a little bit more useful to be level 8, gives me a little bit better chance to hit, and so it's one of those kind of things that's really hard to tell just offhand how much time or use it saves the experience routing. I have a paladin. Paladins in first edition, especially, different classes have much different requirements to level up, and they have really weird curves too. Clerics level up really fast in the beginning, but then they slow down, and mages, who are one of the slowest to level up in the beginning, outpace them for a little bit, and they kind of sing-song back and forth before they reach critical mass level, which is around level 9 or 10 for most classes, where at that point, every 250,000, 350,000, depending on your class, it's about that amount that's required to level up into infinitum, ad infinitum, or whatever you want to say for that, for the rest of forever. Or the maximum level in this game, at least, since we do have a level limit in all of the gold box games. They don't let you level forever and ever and ever. Most characters, it's actually an experience limit, and so whatever level the character is, this first beholder you encounter, at some random point, including after you've killed the real beholder, you may get this random encounter where you see a shadow of the beholder. And if you attack it, it like explodes and bad things happen to you, you take a bunch of damage, and then you get in a fight, I think, but you just sneak past it or leave, and you don't have to worry about it. Sneak past is the best, because then it doesn't move you anywhere. But unfortunately, since we can't run in this area, it does make these encounters a little bit more difficult. I run from a couple of them, but a lot more I'll end up fighting, trying to power through. The old game has a little bit of difficulties when I quit and reload so abruptly all the time. This is a set encounter. There are, I believe, 3 set encounters that I get along the trail that I follow, the quickest way out of here, that I do have to fight. Luckily, again, these armored minotaurs, who all minotaurs in the gold box games wear plate mail for whatever reason. I mean, it's just like they love their plate mail. They have to be steel bullmen or something. But fireballs make quick work of them. The high priests have a lot of hit points. They're like 10th level priests, and so they have like 50 or more hit points, and they or 60 even, and they have very high saving throws. Clerics tend to, especially since all saving throws are boosted by wisdom in first edition, rather interestingly. And so it usually takes a lot. They actually will usually surrender before I end up killing them, simply because I kill all the other enemies faster, and they've taken a lot of damage, and their morale drops, and they say, "We surrender." But we continue along this trail. There's a lot of fighting you can do. There's a couple of treasures that you can get in this area, but they involve a lot more extra fighting and detours that would involve more random encounters as well, and we don't want those, so we avoid them. Once you've got a couple left, especially, you have to be careful with the fireballs. Knowing the exact area that fireballs hit is very important for this speed run. Luckily, it's one of the things that my brain processes very well, so I rarely have a problem with hitting my own characters with fireballs. But it's something that can do that. Now, this is kind of an interesting area because the Beholder's lair is in this cave right next to me. However, in order to prevent you from, for whatever reason, they decided to also have the same chance to, or the same flag exists right here in the spot after him. And it's faster to step there than it is to go into the cave and then out. Plus, it helps out a little bit more. Kind of hard to say. It clumps them up nicely. I think the AoE is a little bit better here. Now, the Medusa, the Hooded Woman reveals herself as a Medusa, and I believe she is the other character who can target. I am certain that I've seen her target my characters with her Stone Gaze, even though I have invisibility. The Beholder can't, but the Medusa can. So I always make sure to kill her first so that can't happen. Luckily, she's pretty weak. She's in a bad position to hit with the Fireball. I can only do it if I target my characters as well, so that's not really worth it. But I usually have 3 characters who can attack her, and we usually get to go first because our high dexes mean that our high dexterities mean that we have a high evasion. Now, people have asked me in chat why the Beholder, who has an anti-magic ray, doesn't use it on us to dispel the dust of disappearance, and it actually isn't programmed that way in the game. Essentially, the Beholder is immune to magic, and that's all they've done with his anti-magic ray. He projects it in front of himself constantly, just about 10 feet, to prevent him from getting hit by fireballs or from direct target spells. He's just immune to magic. That's just how they treat it. Even if it was a ray that he could target things with, he couldn't target us with it because he doesn't, because we're invisible, and you can't target people who are invisible. Same as he can't target us with Disintegrate, Death Spell, Stone Mist, Stone to Flesh. That is the worst fight in the game, pretty much. Required fight in the game, I should say. Except maybe for the final battle if you don't whittle down the enemy forces. I'll go into that a little bit later. But because he can do 3 rays at once. This would not be a bad place to use the Dust of Disappearance casually if you're not, or in any percent run if you're not, probably still wouldn't use it here in a glitchless run. You just have to hope that you can kill the Beholder before he kills you. Have a bunch of archers firing at him, but he has 3 chances a turn to kill characters with Stone to Flesh, Death Spell, Disintegrate. That's the real fight that would be really bad in casual play without glitchless or New Game Plus giving you an infinite amount of Dusts of Disappearance to use. And this is a random encounter that happens right after, and again, it's one of the things that convinces me that there is a general seed that I'm on from my progress, because if I tend to save and reload more encounters, so I guess it isn't this fight. This is a required fight right here. This is one of the set fights. I actually quit and reload thinking it's a random encounter, but it's not. It's actually a set encounter. So it was my previous run to this where I decided to fight everything in the escape, and I ended up not getting that random encounter where the Zentrum fighters attacking me right after, before I get a chance to recover anything, right after my battle against the Beholder. So I can't really reload that fight. But when I did a previous run and I fought some of the actual encounters along the way, I didn't get that one. So there are certain points where the RNG does seem to, it shows that it's a seed and you will get a fight if you've somehow messed with the RNG by, saving and quitting as I have. It's kind of a weird thing. I'm sure it would be pretty fascinating to figure out, but again, I don't really have the knowledge or the time to learn how to manipulate that and really figure it out. It could possibly, if I could figure out how to manipulate the RNG, this run could go even better. But since I don't, oh well. Again, with the Ice Storm, it has a shorter range, so or a shorter AoE, so I can aim it a little closer to my characters, but it's not going to hit as many people. Again, you can see just how well I do the placement here, but now these ones up close, I really can't hit very well without hitting my characters as well, so we finish chopping them down. And then all we have left is the Clerics. Again, one of the other nice things about Ice Storm, though, is that it doesn't get a saving throw, although sometimes it can roll really poor damage, too. One more set encounter in this lair that I have to go through, which is, and this is actually another reason why I don't bother doing this one first, why I don't think it would be that much better than just... yeah, that explains it. You can see my PB is 50 minutes here, my best is 10. It was my previous run to this, my previous personal best that I'd done the week before, that I spent too much time in this cave by fighting all of the random encounters. I have to fight another Dark Elf Lord here, and this time I don't get his equipment. We aren't under the effect of the Pain spell. He has a different sprite, so he doesn't have any equipment, but we do have to... But there he is, Dark Elf Lord, that black-skinned guy there. He's, again, almost immune to magic. And luckily he has all of these other guys in the way. So, and since we're invisible, he won't come after us. I'll be able to go after him at my leisure. He actually took a bit of damage there. That's rare. So these other Manticores would be moderately dangerous too if I was invisible, because they can throw spines, basically. Traditionally, Manticores in mythology are supposed to have a... scorpion tail, but in this mythology, or in D&D, they have a tail with spines on it that they can launch as a missile attack. I think they get like 3 attacks a round or something. Never encountered Manticores very much. This is the only time I remember fighting them in the Gold Box games too. So, but they're a moderately nasty kind of enemy to face at times. Luckily, that fight didn't go too badly. But since I have to do a... I didn't save it. She unfortunately does not have a necklace of missiles anymore. I need to start distributing those around from those who have extras. I forgot to save after that, so this battle that comes right afterwards, it would not save time to reload, because then I'd have to fight the Dark Elf fight again anyway, so I have to power through it. Again, Wand of Ice Storms. At least I know which position they all are in now, even though I've forgotten to identify them. Those mages, they're not as bad as the ones in Ulash. Interestingly, the mages of the Zhentarim in the city of Ulash are worse than the ones here, because they're higher level and they start with the minor globe of invulnerability on. They don't here for whatever reason. I've gone through a couple of permutations of my party up to this point. Before, as I say, I'd previously used human mages because I wanted to start with the fireball spell. Thought it would make it quicker. Ends up not really making much difference because I get the necklaces of missiles so early. And since I can give necklace of missiles to all my characters and then they're all using fireballs, the fireball... I've hardly cast any spells with this fighter magic user. The main reason I have him is to cast the haste spell. So that's why I go with a fighter mage. The only other way he's disadvantaged over a normal mage is, again, he has a maximum level. But since I don't reach that maximum level anyway, and I'm not casting spells, it's better just to have him be a fighter mage. Because then he can actually be useful in combat when he isn't using wands, and especially in the Dark Elf area. Your regular mages are totally useless in the land of Dark Elves usually, except for casting haste spell before the big fights. Enlarge or strength spell if you're not super buffed, but those spells don't help when your stats are really high. First edition AD&D was really difficult. Second edition, very much the same. The later editions smoothed things out, so even 12s and 13s are good. You get some benefit from them, but you really don't get any appreciable benefit, especially in combat, from anything less than a 15 or a 16 in pretty much every stat. Your dexterity lowers your armor class, but it doesn't until 15. You get -1. It's 16 -2, 17 -3. So, especially in a speedrun setting, it's another reason I go ahead and use modify to adjust my characters. There's just no reason to even do a meme where you don't modify your characters, because then you'd just be re-rolling stats forever anyway, trying to get as good as you can. It's just a pointless waste of time, and it's better to have a party. So I'm IDing. I ran out of money. I wasn't collecting or selling nearly as much money as I normally was at this point, because I didn't need as much of it. And so I ended up running out of money when I was really needed it. I do need to sell a few expensive items at some point in the game to have enough to do... It costs 100 gold to identify, I believe. Maybe 200 in this game, I can't remember. I think they lower it in later games, but I think it's 200 at this point. And again, you don't really need items identified most of the time in order to be able to use them, but it's just useful to, for certain items you get a bunch of at the same time, like wands and potions. It's good to know which is which. If I'm really good, I can memorize that. But so I get up to a level 7 mage, so I can cast Ice Storm if I really want to. If I run out of my wands somehow, I can start casting those spells. Humidifiers have enough hit points and armor class to be able to avoid most attacks and have enough and have a good enough chance to hit. Every level you gain is a 5% more chance to hit, basically. So gaining levels is definitely not pointless. And it's taking the time to get those levels can really help in the later battles. Even if you're invincible, if you can't hit the enemy, even because some of the enemies, including Tyrant Thraxus, is immune to fire, so I can't use the fireballs on him. I can blow up all of his minions, but then I have to melee him, so get as many levels as you can with the time you have. So it's one of the things I'm going to be looking into more. Most of the time, I usually get to 175,000, which is enough to level the Paladin to 8. I didn't on my last PB, but it's something I want to look into because just having those extra few hit points and 5% chance to hit can save a little bit of time. So there's a lot you can do in the Ruins of Myth Draenor. Lots of these Rakshasa you can fight. You can get some powerful magic items, but they're not that useful to me. Unfortunately, you can't run from any of the battles, but there are certain ways to avoid some of them, usually through talking. Unfortunately, phase spiders, when you encounter those, it says insects appear for both phase spiders and thrycreen, a bug race common in many D&D worlds. But you can talk your way past the thrycreen, but the spiders just attack you and try and eat you. And they're poisonous too, so it's best just to avoid them. It's a time waste to try to fight them, so we don't bother. We run through the woods to the Ruins of Myth Draenor. You end up south and get involved with a Rakshasa if you take the path. Taking the woods is a lot quicker. We come over here. Here's a fight where hellhounds are chasing a man. We save his life. He dies immediately after, but he tells us where his treasure is buried. It might be worth the time to skip the treasure, but it's a +5 longsword and a girdle of storm giant strength, plus a couple of other some gauntlets that I don't bother picking up. I think they're gauntlets of dexterity. I don't need them. But the girdle of storm giant strength, it just says giant strength, but there are different girdles of that give you the strength of different giants. Storm giants have a 24 strength, which is the second highest strength you can get in the entire game. And so it's really, really awesome to have a storm giant strength girdle for the final fight. It gives me an additional +15, +20% chance to hit with melee, and an additional about 6 points of damage every time I hit. One of the other small things I should probably talk about is that longswords are the most common weapon you'll see because they are the best overall weapon in the game. Two-handed weapons are not as good in 1st edition or 2nd edition because you don't get the double strength bonus that you do from later editions for two-handed weapons. Two-handed swords are really good against big creatures, but having the bonus armor class of magical shields makes a pretty big difference, and long swords are nearly as good. Long swords do 1d8 to small or medium creatures, and they do 1d12 to large creatures. This is another weird 1st edition thing. Weapons do different damage to different size creatures. Small and medium are always the same, but large creatures, the weapons do different damage to. And swords generally do more damage to bigger creatures, and long swords do the most. Now, these Rakshasa, these things are only a small time loss. I should take a lot less time here than I do with them. All I do is parlay. They say, if you bribe us, I'm a bit lost here too. I accidentally went the wrong place, so I'm searching around. I think that I'm where the treasure is, but I missed it. I can't figure out why I didn't get another encounter that I avoid. You get a chance to jump into a fight, but you don't do it because it's a trap, unlike the last time. I got a bit lost and was searching around, but didn't find anything. But you can avoid the Rakshasa patrols by parlaying with them and bribing them. I don't need money for anything else, so why not give away my money to avoid combat? They tell you to not let them catch you here again, but they will never actually attack you as long as you continue to bribe them. If you do anything else than agree to pay their bribe, they will attack you, and they can be really nasty. They're powerful spellcasters. They're nearly immune to magic. You can get a light crossbow and some blessed quarrels from an elven spirit in the previous section, the burial area it's called. But it's a waste of time because you can avoid all the fights with the Rakshasa. Good to do in casual play if you want to explore the whole thing, but for the speedrun, I did it the first few times I speedran this, but I quickly cut it out of the route because it's pointless. So we come into the lair of Tyranthraxis here. Tyranthraxis is an evil demonic spirit under the service of Lord Bane, who can only take control of other creatures in the prime material plane. He has no prime material body of his own, and he likes to take possession of good creatures, like storm giants and bronze dragons, especially ones that use lightning. He was a bronze dragon in Pool of Radiance. He's a storm giant here in Curse of the Azure Bonds. And he uses the bonds to control us. He's about to use his ritual to make us his new vessels. I guess he's going to take over our main leader and then keep the rest of us around for backup insurance. Since we were the powerful enough heroes to vanquish him in the first place, he feels it would be advantageous to use us for his bodies. I don't know, maybe he can possess us all at the same time. The writing isn't very clear on that. But Nameless, the character who invented the bonds in the first place and created Elias and did all this stuff, sacrifices himself to save us. This game is not canon because he still lives in other books and he gets his name back. He is a long story. It's a really wonderful story. Read the books, Azure Bonds and its sequels. I can't remember their names right now, but it deals more with Georgie Wyvernspur and the Nameless Bard, who is also a Wyvernspur. Georgie Wyvernspur is actually his descendant. The Harpers and the things that happened and how he lost his name because of his acts of utter chaos that he caused. But he was pretending to be a priest, was pretending to dispose of the 3 items that would stop Tyranthraxis, the Gauntlet of Moander, Amulet of Lathander, and the Dragon Helm. But he ends up doing a prestidigitation trick somehow. He's a magician, not a mage, but sleight of hand expert. They aren't disposed of. He uses a passphrase to give us temporary relief from the bonds controlling us, gives us back the items. Tyranthraxis strikes him down, we fight his minions. Now we have to go confront Tyranthraxis, and that's the end of the game, once we defeat him. So we have to fight our way through his temple, and just like in Hap, there are a number of different things in the temple that you can do, bunch of places you can go. Oops, zapped myself with the lightning. Too bad. This is a great area for lightning spells. A couple of these fights in this section are just really good for the lightning. You can get into areas where you get long lines of enemies to blast with them. Once again, I want to try to avoid as many fights as possible. Some of them are really easy, but others are annoyingly... Well, they're all easy. I can blow them all up with one of the fireballs, but some of them are really, really fast and easy, because there's like 3 enemies. I blow them up, 2 fireball spells, necklace of missile shots, whatever, they're done. But there are a couple more that are a dozen enemies, and it takes a while to chew through them, and so it's still faster to save and reload. It's just the random encounters in this later portion of the game are so annoying. Again, not too bad compared to some of the other ones, but sometimes in RNG it can be really crazy here. I can get like no encounters, and then in this hallway right before Tyranthraxis I get 7 or 8 in a row. Got good luck here. So this is the final battle right here. Use 1 more dust. Use everything else I need to get up. 24 strength is so awesome. Make sure everybody has enough necklaces, or at least 1 remaining necklace to blow up most of the enemy. A couple of my characters will probably run out of charges before this final battle is over, but then they can begin chopping up the enemies that remain. But, except for, I don't need to give the wizard necklace of mist, of course, because he has the wands of fireballs and ice storms to use, and they have a decent amount of charges on them. Speedrunning the game, I'd never run out of charges of ice storm and fireball, not even when I fought all my encounters. If I really, really thought that I might. So, huge group here. Again, you can fight a lot of the little areas in the temple, defeat a bunch of side enemies and stuff, and that reduces the amount of enemies you have to fight in the final battle. So it's something to do casually, but in the speedrun especially, since all of these enemies can be affected by fireballs, it's a lot faster to fight them all at once. Fireball away, and let's sit back and watch the fireworks. We fight a bunch of margoyles, which are kind of like gargoyles, but they don't have wings. Again, those were not creatures in the original first edition monster manual, which I've read a lot more than the Fiend Folio, or the... I think there's a second monster manual in first edition as well. But I didn't read that one as much as a kid, so I don't remember much about the margoyles despite fighting them here. But 2 armor classes as good as a normal human wearing plate mail with a shield, so they have really hard skin, or hard to hit. But they're pretty basic enemies. They have no other real advantages. They can do multiple attacks, I know, but they're not a threat when they're invisible. Of course, a bunch of these high priests are all like 9th level, 10th level, so they have a lot of hold person spells and better things they can blast, but again, fireballs are going to turn all these enemies to ash. And then there's Tyranthraxus. He's fire immune just because of the type of spirit he is, even though storm giants are not immune to fire. He is. So the fireball is then totally ineffective against him, and he has a -5 armor class as well, over 100 hit points, but, you know, he can't see us, so he can't throw lightning bolts at us. Continue the fireball destruction. And go. If you're looking at the time and think that I'm about to get a great PB, I'm about to get a great PB. This is not that long of a fight, really. It's a lot more difficult fight, if you're not invisible. Both because of the lightning bolts being thrown, the hold person spells being tossed, and just the sheer number of enemies you have to chew through. They would be swarming in on me. Lightning bolts would be raining down from him. He can, since he's a storm giant, he can throw as many lightning bolts as he likes. But I've never let him do it because Dust of Disappearance, man, way OP. Super OP item. Sadly, too OP, they never give it to you in any other gold box game. It's very sad, but I enjoy the heck out of it in this game. Sometime I probably will do some sort of New Game Plus run for this, just for kicks and giggles. It would definitely be a lot faster. There's a lot of stuff that I could avoid for certain. I wouldn't have to go after pretty much any of the loot. I could not worry quite. I could, I'd probably have to. I just probably couldn't carry enough necklaces of missiles for the entire game in one sitting. Maybe I could. If I gave everyone like 4, would that be enough? That'd probably be enough. I use about 2-ish, 3-ish per person normally. But I do a bunch of prep work. Make sure I have enough wands, necklaces, Dusts of Disappearance, because I need a bunch of those too. Everybody with +5 long swords, girdles of storm giant strength, +3 shield, or +2 shield, +3 plate mail, cloak of disappearance, or cloak of displacement. Now all that's left is Tyranthraxus, so we chop him down. Turn off our necklaces so we don't kill ourselves, because your wonderfully smart allies will use the fireballs on yourself here. So the Pool of Radiance, which the first game was named after, is the magical item that Tyranthraxus uses to travel between the astral planes that he's from and this world. And so he's invincible as long as the Pool of Radiance exists. But the Gauntlet of Moander is capable of destroying it, which we do, so Tyranthraxus is gone. Hooray! We are free at last. This super slow pixelation of those. They take us to a fine feast, and this is the victory over screen. You're teleported to Shadowdale where festivities happen. Here's the end game screen where I can remove the party and then continue on to a new game. And that is it. Thanks for watching. That's the run in a nutshell. I hope it was easy enough to understand with the explanations. And look forward to it at RPG Limit Break coming up in just 2 months.